Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello. Good evening. Welcome to the Center for Brooklyn History of the Brooklyn Public Library. My name is Marcia Eli, and I have the honor of greeting you tonight on behalf of my colleagues at the Center for Brooklyn History and the Brooklyn Public Library and the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents. For those who are joining us in this space for the first time and may be wondering what goes on here, I'll share quickly that the Center for Brooklyn History is a vibrant museum, a world-renowned archives and special collections library, an education center serving students of all ages, and a center of community dialogue, largely through free weekly programs like this one. Our public programs often foster engagement with social justice and democratic values, and tonight's program is just that. This is the first of 3 programs in our series, Environmental Injustice, Race, Class, and Toxic Inequality. We explore 3 facets of the topic: how we got here, the present crisis, and the way forward. Tonight, we set the stage by looking at the past and how we got here. We are absolutely honored to be hosting the leading thinkers and doers as part of these 3 discussions, and we would not have been able to do that without the support of Con Edison. Con Edison's generous grant has made this all possible. I want to share our profound thanks and give a special welcome to all the members of the Con Edison team who are here tonight. And now, please help me welcome Joanne Walker, Section Manager of Strategic Partnerships at Con Ed, to say a few words of hello.
I'm like a very tiny person, so hopefully you can see me. Good evening, everyone. Ooh, that was a little weak. We're talking about very important stuff tonight, people. Good evening, everyone. Ooh, a little better. We'll work on it throughout the evening. So I'm Joanne Walker. I'm a lawyer by training, and entertaining. And now I'm manager in the Strategic Partnerships team, where I oversee Con Edison's philanthropic strategy, strategic giving, strategy in the areas of climate change, clean energy, and environmental and social justice. So thank you for being here tonight. Whether you come from the corporate world, grassroots organizing, public service, or the local community, your presence matters. Tonight begins the first in a 3-part series about the intersection of racial inequality and the environment, a long overdue conversation. We start with a simple but urgent question. Why are communities of color and low-income populations still disproportionately exposed to environmental harm, hazards? As Dr. Robert Bullard, the father of environmental justice, reminds us, America is segregated and so is pollution. Environmental racism is not an accident. I repeat that. Environmental racism is not an accident. It's systemic, it's historic, and ongoing. The same forces that shaped where highways, factories, landfills were placed, forces rooted in slavery, redlining, segregation, still determine today who breathes clean air, who drinks safe water, and who bears the brunt of climate change. Let's be clear. Environmental justice is not just about protecting the planet. It's about protecting people. It's about ensuring that every person, no matter their race or income, has the right to safe and healthy environment. At Con Edison, we know we are doing only part of the work. We stand alongside grassroots groups, advocates, community leaders, policymakers, and businesses, all striving for a more just and sustainable Brooklyn. We are here not just to listen, but to learn, to support, and to act. Guided by our environmental justice policy statement, Con Edison is firmly committed to ensuring that all communities, especially disadvantaged ones, are treated equitably and share in the benefits of our operations, clean energy investments, and sustainability initiatives. And yet, we gather tonight at a time of global uncertainty and pain at times. No matter your political views, we all see the suffering. Climate disasters, displacing families, deepening inequity, communities struggling to both here and abroad. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. But, as Maya Angelou so beautifully reminded us, drawing from the old African American spiritual, when it looked like the sun wasn't going to shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. That rainbow wasn't a promise that the storm would pass easily. It was a sign of resilience, of hope, and of the determination to endure. In the fight for environmental justice, we must become rainbows in the clouds to one another. Corporate leaders, activists, neighbors, we each have a role. We must stand together for clean air, safe water, and climate solutions that lift up everyone, not just the privileged few. So I leave you with the words of James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Tonight we face it together and take the first step toward meaningful change. Thank you for being here. I look forward to an evening of honest dialogue, shared learning, and collective action. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Now let me tell you how tonight will go. We have three extraordinary guests. Our series moderator, the Atlantic's Vann R. Newkirk, will lead them in discussion. Following the moderated conversation, we'll turn to your questions. Our ushers are going to bring a mic to you at your seat. Please stand when you ask your question, and please try to keep them brief. Then after the program, we really hope you'll stay and continue the conversation and mingle at the little modest reception that we have in the front. So now it is my pleasure to tell you more about our guests. It was really difficult. They had pages and pages of accomplishments, but I will try to keep it brief. Dr. Robert G. Bullard is a distinguished professor of urban planning and environmental policy and founding director of the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at Texas Southern University. He's also co-founder of the HBCU Climate Change Consortium and the National Black Environmental Justice Network. Professor Bullard is often called, as Joanne said, the father of environmental justice. It is a topic that he has brought his leadership to for decades. As early as 2008, Newsweek named him one of, quote, 13 environmental leaders of the century. In 2019, Apolitical named him one of the world's 100 most influential people in climate policy. In 2020, WebMD gave him its Health Heroes Trailblazer Award, and the United Nations Environment Program honored him with its Champion of the Earth Lifetime Achievement Award. It goes on. He's been inducted to the American Academy of Arts and Science. He received Harvard Law School Environmental Law Society's Horizon Award in 2024. He was elected to the National Academy of Medicine, and pages more. Dr. Bullard has written 18 books. The latest, out in 2023, is The Wrong Complexion for Protection: How the Government Response to Disaster Endangers African American Communities. Jacqueline Patterson is the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. Prior, and for over a decade, she served as the senior director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. Patterson has worked on social justice issues in frontline communities from Kampala, Uganda, to Kansas City, USA, to Kingston, Jamaica. She co-founded Women of Color United, was a senior women's rights policy analyst for Action Aid, and assistant vice president of HIV/AIDS programs for IMA World Health. She holds a master's degree in social work, a master's degree in public health. She currently serves on the advisory boards, and again, there are so many more than I'm mentioning, for the Center of Earth Ethics, the Environmental Justice Movement Fellowship, the High Fund for Gender and Climate Justice. And among the boards of directors that she serves on are the Institute of the Black World, the Just Solutions Collective, the National Black Workers Center Project, and the Climate Museum. In March 2024, Patterson was named one of Time Magazine's Women of the Year, and that same year she was also the recipient of Time Magazine's Earth Award. Kendra Pierre-Louis is an award-winning climate reporter. She has reported on climate for Bloomberg, worked as a senior climate reporter with the Gimlet Spotify podcast, How to Save a Planet, and as a climate reporter with the New York Times, and as a staff writer for Popular Science. She is also the author of the book, Greenwashed, Why We Can't Buy Our Way to a Green Planet. And our moderator tonight, and for all three programs, is Vann R. Newkirk II. He is a senior editor at The Atlantic and the host and co-creator of the narrative podcasts Floodlines and Holy Week. For years, Vann has covered voting rights, democracy, and environmental justice with a focus on how race and class shape the country's and the world's fundamental structures. He was a 2022 Andrew Carnegie Fellow, a 2020 11th Hour Fellow at New America, and a 2018 recipient of the American Society of Magazine Editors Ask Me Next Award. He received the Peabody Award for Floodlines in 2021, and in 2024, he was named Journalist of the Year by the Washington Association of Black Journalists. We are so honored to have all of you here at the Center for Brooklyn History tonight. Please help us welcome the panel to the stage.
All right. Well, we done got some Baldwin and some Maya Angelou already. I feel like we can go home. Go have some. Thank you so much for that. And as Marcia mentioned, this is the first of a three-part series. And we really hope that these three events are going to tell a single story. We want to leave people with the understanding and the tools to do some imagining after you leave these three. So I do hope that you join us for the following events as well on June 16th and June 24th. Now, I am sharing the stage with people who I've looked up to for years, some of the greatest minds, not just on environmental justice, but just the greatest minds around, period. This discussion is titled The Path to Today, and I think we should probably start by understanding where we are today. And I want to start with Kendra. I want to ask you sort of your assessment of where we are environmental justice-wise right now in June 2025.
In the US or in the world?
Let's start with the US.
I think on the plus side, we actually have an understanding of what environmental justice is. But on the negative side, we've done nothing to stop it. And it's only, in my opinion, getting worse because of the impacts of climate change. Environmental justice is both a policy decision or the consequence, or injustice, let me rephrase. Environmental injustice is both the consequences of decades, if not centuries, of policy decisions laid atop exposure risks, right? And those exposure risks are getting worse because of climate change. So if you have someone who lives in a low-lying community, because that is the only place where Black and brown individuals were allowed to live, so places, or were forcibly moved to, so places like the Rockaways in New York or places like Coney Island. Now, so you already have that risk in the first place, now that risk is exacerbated because of climate change. Or if you live in an area like Long Island City that was next to a power plant, and now you have a flooding risk laid atop that. So like those exposure risks are getting worse, even if you accept the long-term policy risks. Is that clear?
That's clear. Jackie, you may not even remember this, but years and years ago, when I was literally just Googling what is environmental justice, your name was like the first Google search term that was returned, and I called you. And you agreed to do a little informative interview for me just to help understand what this was. And so you kind of helped kick my career off. So I thank you for that. But also that should tell you, I think, exactly how, Jackie's just a great communicator. I do want to hear from you. What is your sense of where we are now with environmental justice?
Yeah, thank you. And that is really, I can't believe you remember that. That's amazing. Yeah, so interestingly enough, I'll start by saying I'm sure that the fact that my name came up first was because of like SEO, like optimization, because, I
Shout
was
out
with
to
the
your social media people
Yeah,
and your
exactly.
SEO people, because
Yeah,
you were there.
yeah, definitely. But it's interesting as you asked that question. I kind of reflected a little bit, both kind of grimly and with inspiration. So I'll start on the negative side so we can progress to the positive. On the negative side, we do have communities like Sand Branch, Texas, that hasn't had running water since the mid 80s. And so like there has been so little progress with certain communities. Certain communities are in like the same situation, whether it's been Ford or Carter or Reagan or whoever's been in office, it's made no discernible difference in their existence and in the material conditions that challenge them. We have, I can just name community after community that is just in the exact same state or worse over decades and decades. But at the same time, on the positive end, one thing that we are seeing, and Dr. Bullard will talk more about this, is the communities that are rising up, the communities that are saying, we're not going to take this anymore, and we're going to seize the power. And we're seeing the wins that are happening, whether it's Royshetta Ozane in Lake Charles, Louisiana, or Sharon Levine, also in Louisiana, but like we can just name person after person. And again, Dr. Bullard will tell you more of those stories. So it's kind of, it's the two sides of the coin. We see the communities that continue to suffer, but we also see the resistance that's rising and that's winning. And then we have this current moment on top of all that, which I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Dr. Bullard, I feel like Jackie just teed you up here. Why don't you tell us about the places that are rising up?
Well, I think it's fitting to say that in this moment in time, we've been there before, and that our movement grew out of struggle, and we didn't get in this struggle to lose, because we talk about life and death. The fact that our environmental justice movement is a young movement, and it has matured to the point where we were, in the beginning, we were fighting poison, pollution, toxics, and rightfully so. But then we looked around and say, we should also fight for those good things that make us healthy and our communities healthy, and we should fight just as hard to fight against the bad stuff and fight for the good stuff. We're seeing that we had, the last 45, almost 50 years or so, we had begun to get the language of justice incorporated into policy and the definitions of what is a healthy community, what is a sustainable community, what is a livable community, what is a just community. And we've always had forces trying to push that out of the conversation. In the 70s and 80s, it was individuals, organizations, institutions, structures trying to conflate environmental justice with affirmative action. Today, 40 years fast forward, is environmental justice being conflated with DEI and throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So we are in a moment where we have to say no to poison, pollution, death, and destruction. And it's not just about survival, it's about progress beyond. That's how our movement has matured and grown. and that we are an intergenerational movement now. Whereas before it was more one generation dominating, but now we have boomers like myself, still fighting, still standing, and we have Gen X, Y, Z, Zoomers who outnumber us. But together we are a powerful force, Zoomers and going all the way down to, or coming all the way up to boomers. That's our movement, and that gives me hope. All the negative stuff, we're going to take it, but we're going to push it back, and we're going to keep fighting.
Well, I do want to ask you about the negative stuff, though. I mean, I think the last time we spoke, the U.S. was in a different place. There were new regulations being passed for air and water safety and cancer rally. There was some real meaningful movement on these things that had been festering for decades. And now, as you say, this current administration is saying that EJ is DEI and DEI is illegal. And there has been rumors of suing entities that have taken EJ dollars on the basis of that being a fraudulent theory. I know you are focusing on the positives and the things that people are still doing. But does that not keep you up at night sometimes? Maybe once, twice?
Well, I'm a morning person.
Okay.
I get most of my work done early in the morning.
All right.
What I say to that is our movement was not born inside of government. Our movement, some of the greatest work we did not have one dime from the government. And so when we build our house, our movement on solid ground, and say no matter what, we're going to persevere. And the fact that what's going on right now, a lot of it is illegal. It's like a slap suit. And for those people who don't know what a slap suit is, strategic lawsuit against a
That's the frivolous,
perfect person. The lawsuit is not to win, it's to shut you down, close down your organization, your little nonprofit over here, tie you up in litigation, and by the time you look around, your own energy has been exhausted, and you won the case, but you've tied up. What we have to do is make sure we keep focused on the fact that even when the best of times, when we were able to get legislation and get executive orders and all of, there were still gaps and missing people left out and left behind. And we have worked tremendously hard so that our model is, I'm a Vietnam era Marine Corps vet, URA. Our motto is never, don't leave anyone behind. Semper Fi, always faithful. That's our movement. In the worst of time, we have to rise up and get all of us together in a big tent and staying focused and not get distracted by shiny objects over here. We're going to do this. Focus. Justice, fairness, and equity across the board. Air, water, food. The most vulnerable, children. If we protect children and provide the standards that are high to protect children's health, we protect everybody. That's what we should fight for.
Well, I want to ask a little bit more to the point of today's session, how we got here. We just talked about some of the recent history, but Dr. Bullard, Jackie, you all have been doing great work in helping people understand the deep history and how the issues of our environment, of pollution, of who is assigned risk from disaster, those are all overlaid on our existing structures. Jackie, I want to ask you, in your from your various perches, what has been the prime mover of environmental injustice in America?
Thank you. Wow, that's a deep question. So, yeah, I mean, really, if you start from the founding of this country, which was founded on this on this, like the people kind of romanticize this notion of people seeking freedom and so forth, but really people were seeking riches in a lot of ways. And so that extractive intent has been like the very basis of our existence, the very basis of our economy. And we, as the very frontline communities that are impacted by environmental injustice, were the communities that became the commodities that were traded on the first markets. And so when you think of the ways that people even were weaponized to engage with the land, the people were stolen from their land to come here and be weaponized to engage with the land in a way that wasn't respectful of the land, and certainly not respectful of the people. And then you see how that then became institutionalized through laws and policies. And so the environmental injustice is just a continuation of that same. And so we saw even as emancipation came, there was the Homestead and Morrill Acts that continued to assign certain people to have resources to have the best land, and other people were just left to scramble for a few pennies to pull together whatever non-fertile land that they can get. And so from the very beginning, we were, taken from home, and then herded into certain areas and so forth. And that just continues on. So that, in a small nutshell, I can go on and on, but that's when we talk about the United States. We can talk about it also from a global perspective, as Kendra started to relate to. But yeah,
That was a solid 500-year history. Thank you.
I also think it's worth asking almost the opposite question, which is who was afforded clean air, clean water? Because historically, most Americans were not. Like once the Industrial Revolution hit, New York was filthy. I went to Pittsburgh for the first time in 2015, and they told me that like through the 1970s, through the early 80s, you couldn't wear a white shirt in Pittsburgh because it would be gray by lunchtime, right? So like the wealthy could always buy themselves into they would always kind of find country homes or ways to escape the pollution. But many of the regulations that we're looking at today, from clean air, clean water, to the Pure Food and Air Act, the Pure Food and Air Act and like regulations around milk, for example, sorry, this is going to sound like a tangent, but I swear it's not, came about, like the regulations around like needing pasteurized milk came about because milk was so filthy, it was killing children. And one of the people it killed was, for the New Yorkers here, the founder of Abraham and Straus and Bloomingdale's, his kid died. And so he made it his life's mission to clean up our milk supply. So this is one of the richest men in New York City, and he couldn't get clean milk for his kids without regulation. So the real question is, so we started passing these regulations to clean things up, but we carved in, both through kind of the historic legacy of where we put people, like poor people, people of color, we carved in these loopholes where we allowed people to continue polluting where the most vulnerable, the least politically powerful people live. So in some ways, it's almost the opposite question, which is because for so long, until pretty recently, one of the first stories I ever did that went viral was "This is what America looked like" during the first Trump administration, "This is what America looks like before the EPA." And it was just a series of photos that the EPA had commissioned in the 1970s, kind of like baseline of how polluted America was. And most of us have forgotten it because we weren't alive back then. But this was a very filthy country for a very long time.
Well, you are talking about, so the role of race in America has always been assignment of risk, right? It's who is vulnerable, who is less vulnerable. But we don't usually think about, well, not us, but a lot of people don't usually think about vulnerability in terms of your environment, right? Mm-hmm. How have you seen that change? Have you seen more people thinking of race and along those lines?
I don't think people are thinking along those lines, and the reason I say that is because of COVID. COVID was kind of, as a climate reporter, which is primarily what I am, I'm going to curse, I'm sorry, it was a mindfuck for me. Because how many of you guys were in New York during COVID? Like especially March 2020? Yeah. So like all of you, I was sitting in my home having panic attacks every day, and getting emails from work about all the people who'd gotten COVID. And it was so real here. It was so real. And then I'd go on the internet, or I'd talk to my sibling in Florida, And they were like, nothing shut down here, or like it was shut down for 15 minutes, but then they only learned that people of color, that Black and Hispanic people were dying, and white people assumed that COVID wasn't going to get them. And then they started catching up in deaths because they thought that the reason why Black people were dying was because of some defect with Black and brown people, and not the fact that because of racism, because of so many other factors, Black and brown people had higher exposure risk. So I don't think we've gotten there yet. And I think the way it crops up and the way people confuse it is like wellness culture is people's way of trying to control that personal risk instead of looking at it as a policy problem, looking at it as a social problem, looking at it as a cultural problem.
And the thing that strikes me about the COVID example, right, is we have the studies now that show that once people understood COVID to be a racialized issue, they stopped caring about it, right?
Yep. And that's fundamentally changed how I report on climate. Now I don't mention the racialized risk aspect of climate unless it's directly germane to the story, because I feel like if I put in as like a 1 or 2 sentence in a story more broadly that people of color or that lower income people or people in the global south are disproportionately at risk, it gives white people an out not to care. Sorry, but I'm being honest.
Wow.
Let me just jump in on this from someone who grew up in the South, not South Bronx, not South Philly, but the United States South. Free land, free labor, free men, free enterprise. I'm talking the South. I'm not saying it's unique. It's different. Race was always there. It was not a hidden. It was in your face. Jim Crow, segregation by law. The other side of the tracks. You don't get paved streets. You don't get running water. You don't get fire protection. You don't get levees. You don't get the good things that make it healthy. You get all the bad stuff, the pollution, the industry, the garbage landfills, even the chemical plants. You don't get the jobs. You get the poverty, and you get the pollution, and you get the stuff put where you are. So race was there, and it was segregated. That's why I say America's segregated, so it's pollution. So the awareness was not raised to the point of people saying, well, it's okay to poison Black people because your lives are less worth less, and you are worth less. Some people would say worthless. So that was the thinking. So the politics of pollution and segregation and Jim Crow drove the values of and ethics of it's okay to dump on Black people. And there was lots of information in people's heads, but there was not a lot of documentation. When I wrote Dumping in Dixie, Race, Class, and Environmental Equality in 1990, that was not a single book that dealt with this. I got a PhD and went through courses, not a single course that dealt with this. This is 1976, so I graduated. So the awareness for Black people was always there. We knew that we were getting poisoned, but nobody was listening. More people have to die in order for us to even get listened to. And then they say you're making it up. That you're not sick. Going back to that job. That's the problem of not caring and not raising the awareness to the level that we have basic rights and the same rights as others, but it was not codified. And even when it got codified in law, it still was not followed.
I just want to piggyback on Dr. Bullard saying that pollution is segregated because America is segregated, and that's true. But it's true to a point because there's a lot of really interesting literature that found that when you live in a segregated community, that your overall levels of pollution are higher. So it's the same pattern still bears out where communities of color, low-income communities have disproportionate pollution compared to like the community overall. But a white person in that community is getting a lot more pollution than if they lived in an integrated community, either because they didn't vote for pollution controls, because they didn't worry about the power plant that was being put in the Black side of town, all of those things. So like, yes, like I'm really cursing today. A good friend of mine likes to say there's no pissing section in the pool. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people haven't wrapped their heads around. Where like, yeah, if someone pees in the pool and you're next to them, you're gonna get most of the piss, but everyone in that pool is getting peed on.
Well,
Yes.
yeah,
See,
that's a
that-
southern example,
in
though,
wartime,
right?
in
Yeah.
wartime, we call that collateral damage. You know, that's friendly fire. Like when I wrote Dumping in Dixie, I looked at the South and I went to a state. I went to West Virginia. People ask, why are you going to West Virginia? Is there no black people in West Virginia? Yes, they are. And Union Carbide found them. When West Virginia broke away from Virginia and said, we don't want to be no slave states, there were some black people that went with West Virginia. And they settled in a little area called Kanawha River Valley. And the chemical valley and good jobs, not half the mine, the chemical companies, sat down right in that area. And for a long time, white people in West Virginia were getting polluted, poisoned, mountaintop removal, chemical plants. And our environmental justice movement invited them to join us because they were getting polluted by the same companies. And they said, no, we don't have an environmental justice problem because we're white. It took 10 years for them to recognize that being poisoned and you getting sick, no health insurance, you're in the same situation that we are. It's just that it's Appalachia and it's environmental justice in whiteface. That's breaking through that. And to some extent, we still haven't broken through it because there's still people who don't want Obamacare. I'm gonna put another label on it because it's got a black man attached to the insurance, but they want to keep their Connect Care. Connect Care is Kentucky Obamacare. Race goes into a lot of the thinking of a lot of people, and they will vote against their own best interest, and not just voting in terms of political process, but voting in terms of denying themselves and not moving to make sure that the pollution rules, regulations are just as strengthened on the books as opposed to saying, well, we don't want these because it's killing jobs. No, that's just propaganda.
Well, it's like let's make sure we have our mics close so everybody can hear. But it's like the Mississippi example, right? Mississippi, the place where the fewest black folks can read is also the place where the fewest white folks can read. And when you build a system that is based on that, you are going to have that collateral damage.
I just want to add one more point to Dr. Bullard, where he mentioned Union Carbide in West Virginia. And I know we're really kind of primarily focused on the United States, but if you zoom out, one of the world's largest environmental disasters was promulgated by Union Carbide in India. There's a really good Netflix miniseries on it. So these companies do that, like these patterns, it's easier to recognize those patterns where you live, so it's easy to see them in the United States, but they replicate over and over again, and it goes both ways, by the way. So the Formosa plant, the plastic plant that a lot of people in Texas have been fighting, it is a, I believe, Taiwanese company that essentially lost its social license to operate in Taiwan, and so that's why they set up shop in Texas. Like, this happens these companies are getting really good at finding places where they can set up shop and kind of escape regulation as much as possible.
Now, as a point of personal privilege, also as a Southerner, my mama worked in Warren County, and I want to ask you, Dr. Bullard, to this moment in Warren County is kind of cited as a beginning of a movement. Can you tell us more about that and how it helped bring new understanding to you? And, I think helped this dynamic of people knowing that there was a thing, but not having a language and not having the data and not having the ability to show people who were dead set on saying there was no thing that it existed.
Okay, let me give you some prehistory. This is prehistoric. This is before Warren County. Was Beam versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation in Houston, Texas. And this is 1979. Linda McKeever Bullard, my wife at the time, filed a lawsuit against BFI, Brown and Ferris Industries, over a landfill being located in a predominantly black community in Houston, Northeast Houston, Texas. When I say predominantly black, that's like me saying my family is predominantly black. It was all black. Middle class suburban neighborhood. And she asked me to collect data for the lawsuit. I did the study, 1979. and did the mapping, showed that 5 out of 5 of city-owned landfills, 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators, and 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills in Houston from the 1930s up to 1978 were in predominantly black neighborhoods. 83% of them, even though blacks made up only 25% of the population. Now, this is 1979. Before there was a movement, we went to court in 85, and the judge was a older white man, must have been 150 years old. He was calling us niggers. Now, down south, that's an N-word dressed up. There was no movement in 1979. It was not until 1982, 83 in Warren County where there was a company out of New York. Where are we now? New York. Went down and bought some oil in Raleigh, North Carolina. And they were going to recycle, do something, but it was contaminated with polychlorinated biphenyl, PCBs. Nasty stuff you won't sprinkle on your Cheerios. Nasty. And EPA's law changed, so they couldn't recycle PCBs, and so they dumped it along the highways. And they cleaned it up in 1978. Remember, 1978. And they needed to clean up the dirt along the highways and needed a place to dispose of it, dump it. And they went through this rigorous process. And the envelope is, it was science, but it was political science. Warren County came up the number. There's 100 counties in North Carolina, and this predominantly black rural county got the nod for this landfill.
The predominantly blackest.
Predominantly black, rural and poor. And the people said no. They organized, mobilized. Dr. Benjamin Chavis, he was a director, a commission for racial justice, a black civil rights organization based in a white denomination church. Organized. You had the NAACP, you had the Congressional Black Caucus, you had groups, you had young people. Look on the cover of Dumping in Dixie. There's middle school kids putting their bodies on the road in front of these dump trucks. Middle school, not old enough to vote, but old enough to know right and wrong. And Benjamin Chavis, Dr. Chavis basically said, this is environmental racism. That moment in 1983 is when our national movement, because it drew a lot of people to Warren County, an unlikely place to birth a movement, but it's not by accident that the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement, and the environmental justice movement were both birthed in the South. You understand what I'm saying? It doesn't mean that there weren't isolated struggles going on all over, but that moment in time is when we say gave birth to our movement in Warren County. And the fact is that Warren County gave birth to a movement, but still it has been left behind in a lot of ways, in that the people who were in the county had to drive 15, 20 miles to get to a hospital. It's very poor. But they say, that's a good place to put this poison. And the people rose up and said no. And we have to give credit for what they did. Over 500 people went to jail. You know what I'm saying? This was not just something as, oh, I'm going to protest today and Tuesday, I'm going, but they went to jail. That's why we say Warren County. It's sacred.
Now, we're going to open up the floor for questions soon, so I want to make sure y'all are all thinking about your good questions. Jackie, Kendra brought up, we do want to talk about how EJ, how climate justice are international, global movements. And I want to ask you, how have you seen people who are in other countries, in other contexts, reaching out to you for understanding based on yours?
Thank you. Yes. So interestingly enough, when we were first doing this work around environmental justice at the NAACP, we had everyone from a group from Barbados reached out, and they said that Shell Oil was doing was causing some challenges there, and they were saying, we've seen what you've done around these oil and gas industry. Is there any way that you can come and provide support to us in addressing this? We've engaged with. There's gender justice groups across the world that whether it's in the Niger Delta, where people are dealing with constantly, where once again, Shell Oil and Total Energies are causing issues there. really burning people out of their homes with the oil and gas exploration, and unfortunately with the challenge that we have here in terms of people really kind of opening the door for drilling and so forth in the administration. Some of the activists there are finding the same kind of such circumstances where their governments are also welcoming people and doing this because they see the profits. And so they come to us and they say, how are we going to work together so that we can defeat these similar circumstances? They also talk about now as we are able to push out coal from, well, that was before, but they were then saying to us that now we're getting these coal exports that are coming down to our countries. What can we do to make sure that it's not kind of this NIMBY dynamic, not in my backyard, where we get it out of our backyard and it goes into theirs? And so those are just some of the examples of some of the folks who have come to us and said, how can we build power together so that we're not, because we have common cause for sure. Mm-hmm.
Let me just say, our environmental justice movement was birthed here. But when we organized United Church of Christ, Commission for Racial Justice, Ben Chavis, pulled a group of us together to plan the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, October of 1991. It's 30-something years ago. We invited nations, organizations from different parts of the world. We had at least a half dozen representatives, delegates of color from other parts of the world, African descent, developing nations. And this is October 1991. When we developed those 17 principles of environmental justice, in October of 1991, there was a group of us that's organized a delegation to go to the Rio Earth Summit in June of 1992. We took our principles and our people. It was not a lot of us, but we were in force. Those principles from October 91 to June 1992 had been translated in at least a dozen languages, including Spanish and Portuguese. People had our principles. We weren't aware of it, had our principles. And those principles were carried and are still being carried all over the world. Every UN summit or COP meeting, we are there in force. Our environmental justice principles have migrated into climate justice principles, and that we've organized and mobilized in the NGO forums. That's the non-governmental parts of the UN climate summits, and it took 27 of those UN summits, climate summits, before we had a climate justice pavilion on the government side, which is the blue zone, is where governments are meeting and organizing and negotiating treaties when it comes to the global issues of climate. And it took 3 organizations: West Hall Environmental Justice, WEAC, Deep South Center for Environmental Justice in Louisiana, and the Bullard Center for Environmental Justice at Texas A&M University. 3 black organizations and 3 black people who graduated from HBCUs to conceive and move the agenda to say, we are tired of having to be invited to the blue zone to other people's house. We needed our own house. That climate justice pavilion was the rocking place for climate justice globally, and we did it. They wouldn't let us have a climate justice pavilion after
Y'all was acting
Egypt.
up too much, huh?
After Egypt, but in in Brazil, we're gonna have it. So, and it has been us moving the envelope. When I say us, I'm talking about the facts, the same people that gave the impetus for moving environmentalism from being something that didn't represent to something that was represented everybody. I don't brag, I'm telling you, I was there. I didn't see the video, I was there.
So I think we are going to open it up for questions now. Thank you all for dealing with mine. We're going to run a mic.
Hello. I find this all really interesting. I thought Dr. Patterson said a really interesting word, and I'd like to see how that affects your thinking, and that was gender. And I'm interested to know if there are any gender differentials or how gender plays into these two topics.
Yes, there are many, many, many gender differentials. So on the everything from the driver's side of the climate continuum and environmental injustice to the impacts on the climate impact side, there are gender differentials. There are what comes out of these smokestacks includes endocrine disruptors, which is a challenge around the reproductive health of women. There is the fact that along the oil and gas pipeline, whether it's the man camps out in the west or these pipeline trails where they have, anyway, along those lines, the industry and who it attracts and how they have what they call man camps, where people are coming to do the drilling, and they're coming away from their homes and they're gathered there and they're all staying in these man camps. And those man camps become places of trafficking. They become places of trafficking of people and of drugs. And unfortunately, this is a lot of the place where missing and murdered indigenous women. There's actually a good CNN special that was done on that a while ago, but it's unfortunately something that is a serious and horrific situation that's barely ever even spoken about. It's as if, yeah, again, this is where we have these racialized differentials in terms of who would be considered to be worthy of justice, and that is definitely not the case with the missing and murdered indigenous people. There are, on the other side of the climate continuum, we have the disasters and the impacts of disasters that are differentially impacting women. Women are more likely to experience violence in the aftermath of disasters. So after the BP oil drilling disaster, for example, the police blotters quadrupled when it came to domestic violence. After Hurricane Katrina, the sexual violence that happened after Hurricane Katrina was rampant. In other nations, it's the same thing. The earthquake in Gujarat, the earthquake in Haiti, consistently, whenever there's a disaster, there's a spike in violence against women. I'm actually just about to publish a paper around the intersection of gender, race, and energy justice. So there'll be a lot more there, but I could literally go on and on. But those are a few examples. Thank you for that. But I'll also too say that on the positive side, the positive gender differential is that women, they say people who are closest to the problem are best equipped to design the solutions. So women's leadership on environmental justice is stellar as well. So some of the biggest victories that we've seen have been through women's leadership. The youngest person to win the Goldman Prize, Destiny Watford, who won against a incinerator that was being permitted in Baltimore, near where I live, was a 17-year-old young lady in Baltimore. So literally person after person after person, the victories and the leadership of women has been also differentially stellar. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, there was a myth back in the 80s and early 90s that people of color are not concerned about the environment, and there was no directory. And there was a National Wildlife Federation had a directory of conservation organizations, and none of our organizations were in it. And so my center developed the People of Color Environmental Groups Directory and did one in 91. And 75% of the environmental justice organizations of color in that directory were women. We updated it in 1994, 2000, and we just did a 2023 directory updated. Women of color continue to be the backbone of the environmental justice movement in the U.S. as well as globally, and rightfully so. In terms of the honors, awards, accolades, they're beginning to go to where the awards are beginning to go to where those achievements and milestones are deserved. Still, they are not getting their due, And it means that too often there's so much placed on women's shoulders that the brothers, men, we're gonna have to step up more because of the violence and the attacks. And but again, the women are holding their own in terms of this work, family, home, community, and they are fierce. Those grandmothers, those great grandmothers, retired school teachers, they are rock solid. They're like the Rangers of the Marine Corps. You know what I'm saying? They don't take no for an answer, and that's what we need, and they are fighting for a good cause.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciated the comments from everyone. My question, I think, is primarily for Kendra. A comment that you made really stuck with me about how in your current reporting, a lot of times, unless it's especially germane to the story, you don't report the statistic if it's, it's issue more prominently impacting Black or brown people. And I think it's something I was sitting with me a lot. I'm a health equity researcher in a time where funding's getting terminated, especially if you do that type of work. It's been incredibly prevalent for environmental justice research, and we're often being pressured now to just not report certain things or not kind of discuss certain things to have better chances of getting funding, getting published. But the flip side of that is the concern that these facts don't make it out. And I'm wondering how you balance that in those decisions.
Yeah, so the last story that I reported was specifically, it's a little complicated, but it's specifically looking at how Trump's immigration crackdown is going to make rebuilding after disaster more difficult than ever. And so that's central to the story is like immigration crackdown, right? And so I still do those stories, but what I don't do is, let's say I'm doing a generic story about hurricane season, I don't insert that sentence that says, communities of colors or communities of color or low-income communities are more disproportionately impacted. A story that I'm working on, or that I think I'm working on, I've worked on it and then I benched it, but I think I'm bringing it back now because it's going to be a clusterfuck of a hurricane season, is why evacuation is so difficult. And so that is a story where income and what's the word I'm looking for? So like after Hurricane Katrina, one of the reasons Hurricane Katrina was so difficult is because something like 80% of New Orleans residents at the time were from New Orleans. Like they were born and raised there, so their ability to evacuate to people outside of New Orleans was very thin because their social network was so embedded in that city, right? And so those kinds of details are really important if I'm doing a story about evacuation. But if I'm doing a generic story about hurricane season, I'm not throwing in a sentence for environmental justice there because I just feel like that gives white people a license to turn out. So it's both. I still do those stories, and I think those stories are very important, but I only talk about it when it's central to the story. I don't do it as an aside or as a throwaway sentence.
Look, hold it. Let me just say to the young man back about funding. Funding should not drive what we research and what we report. I know you weren't saying that. Because if we allow funding to dictate what we are curious about and what kinds of data and the science and the facts, knowing that that's not enough, we have to marry that with action to get change. And if we wait for the funding to come, and if it dries up, then if that model is being used, then we will be just sitting on the sidelines waiting for people to die. I've written 18 books. Every one of those books do not disguise race. It puts it in the forefront in terms of contextual, structural, the drivers behind inequality, whether it's housing, transportation, energy, health, disaster, food and water security, sustainability, you name it, smart growth, sprawl. It's one book, but it's 18 volumes. The other point, to disguise and not deal with racism head on is to allow the subject matter to morph into something that as if somehow poverty can be a proxy for race, and it can't. For example, statistics shows that middle-income African Americans who make $56,000 live in neighborhoods that are more polluted than whites who make $10,000. So it's not even when you control for income, race, etc. Black middle-class folks are getting poisoned. Why? Jim Crow segregation, redlining, etc. White people can dress up and move to the suburbs. If we don't pull that racism out and challenge it, and not and say, well, we are making people uncomfortable, and we don't want to deal with it because we're not going to get it published, or we're not going to get a grant. We don't need everybody doing that, standing up, being hardcore, never that. But we need some doing it because if we don't, we won't have the studies that when you go back and pull them off the shelf, say, damn, they wrote about that 30 years ago. What's going on? Redlining is, you can redline and you can associate that with more flooding, more asthma, more death from COVID because of the pollution. I mean, so we need that. We need those other studies, and those studies that some of us do that don't depend on somebody giving us a grant.
Well, Kendra, I want to ask you, do you think that in this time, that type of assignment and call out, it's not just causing people to tune out, it might make certain things targets?
Yeah, so I think to your point, and I want to emphasize, I still do environmental justice stories.
Yes.
Like during COVID, I did a story, I think it was titled, because of George Floyd, like why Black people can't breathe, and it was about the links between COVID and air pollution, right? So I think it's very important to still do those stories. What I don't do is throw it in as an aside that gives people ammunition to have a half-baked idea of what the issue is, and so that white people can tune out and be like, it's not about me. What I try to do is make it, I try to do those stories where it's the centrality of the stories to give people the space to breathe, to really understand that, not to repeat myself, but that there is no pissy sectioning in the pool, that it all connects to everyone and that it's all interrelated, which is, I think, a little bit different. And one of the reasons, I'm really glad to be freelancing right now is it gives me the flexibility to find the outlets that are willing to do those stories, that are willing, because it's not always easy. Like when I was at the Times, it was really difficult to do environmental justice stories. I had one killed that I fought to get brought back. I had one that I kind of tricked them and said it was an Al Gore story, but I filed a Reverend Barber story. Al Gore was in it, it's fine, I didn't completely lie. So you have to find there are going to be people who are willing to pay for that work. And it may be that you have to separate it, that you do certain types of health equity, maybe it's about women or something, and that you find the people who are willing and capable, like the Gates Foundation or whatever, to fund that research that you think is really important, and to make that the head on, as opposed to trying to shove it in and make it an aside and create this false narrative.
Hi. I actually just came up from New Orleans a couple days ago. I used to talk to a lot of the Rise St. James people over in Cancer Alley. And whenever I took what they were saying over to like the public health school or the Department of Health, they would either deny that it was happening or they would just not be interested. But a lot of these institutions kind of gatekeep a lot of the data that people need to prove that things are happening legally, like when the EPA comes looking around. So I guess my question is, what is the role of these institutions going to be in the future in this movement? Do we leave them behind completely? And how do we get that data from them and like that evidence that we need if we do need to leave them behind?
Let me give you a little history lesson. I'm a sociologist, but I'm a student of history. In the early 90s, there was a group of us who left big white universities and our cushy jobs and went back to our historically Black college and university in the South, where many of us had got our undergraduate degrees from. This is the deal, and set up these environmental justice centers. And for more than a decade, there were 5 centers at universities in the whole United States, 5 of them, All 5 of them that did environmental justice research, policy, working with communities, developing the model of community university partnership. There were 5 of us. Xavier University in New Orleans, Clark Atlanta University Environmental Justice Resource Center that I started. Dr. Wright started the Deep South Center at Xavier University, Hampton University, Florida A&M University, and Texas Southern University, Thurgood Marshall School of Law. These 5 universities were doing the bulk of the work when it came to research, when it came to environmental justice. If you go back to the research that was being generated, in the 80s and the 90s, early, you'll see the names of the folks who generated most of the data, and a couple of colleagues at the University of Michigan. There was no money in this to start centers. We did it out of the need that it needed to be done because of our communities were being poisoned. The big universities in the Gulf Coast states, I won't call any names, but they got initials. You know the initials, like the A&Ms and the LSUs and some of the other schools.
That's a name.
There's only one private school. I won't call any names, but they were getting the monies from the chemical companies, the chemistry department, or the school of technology, the agriculture, whatever. They getting the money, and they were not going to do any of the work on these subject matters that we're talking about. Most of the foundations in the region, foundations didn't fund this kind of stuff. We had to go to the national foundations. So when money became available, then you start seeing more and more of these fewer professors getting into it. But still, many of the state DEQs, Department of Environmental Quality, or in case of Texas, TCEQs, had some of the directors who came from the very universities that got all the money from the oil and gas company, the petrochemical company. So you had these universities that were captured by the money. Fast forward 40 years later, with the Inflation Reduction Act, when money is available for $60 billion in clean energy and $60 billion in the IRA for environmental justice, a lot of these major universities now are clamoring for the money, going for the money, getting the big bucks on bad stuff like carbon capture, storage, hydrogen hubs. And where they're going to put that same stuff in the same communities that's being poisoned. That's why I say there's some of the universities, and I'm not faulting all PWIs, predominantly white institutions. Some have been good, still with us on this work, but many of them have stayed loyal to the money, the big, dirty money when it comes to fossil fuel industry and the petrochemical industry and big pharma. Now, I probably ruffle some feathers, but I'm a pescatarian. But again, the driver of money and the power that money has over, and so much of this dirty money has captured our universities, because it's like a giant dose of heroin. It's hard for them to get off this money.
The other thing I just want to add really quickly is that one of the benefits of it being 2025 is technology has changed so rapidly. So you're not as dependent on, like it used to be, if you wanted to do air quality monitor, you really were dependent on that $10,000 gold standard EPA monitor. That's not true anymore. There are a lot of low-cost sensors that can give you reasonably decent data, and because of the internet, a lot of retired engineers who have nothing but time in their hands who would love a project. And it's really about finding those connections and connecting them and getting that baseline data. And that's what a lot of groups have managed to do. And that's what a lot of journalism is doing, actually. And groups like, I think, Climate Central are really good about partnering with professors who have the skill and are actually interested and maybe don't have the funding but have a couple of extra hours to train you on how to do something. So there are resources out there for activist groups who want to do this work, and it's not as cost prohibitive as it once used to be.
Yeah, and I should say, the big interventions we talked about earlier in Cancer Rally were spurred by community-directed research. So I think, like you were saying, there's a lot more capacity now, and just because of technology, the ability of marginalized communities to take this into their own hands is, we haven't had it. And actually, we were talking about Warren County. That was another community directed and guided. You had studies there. And so that's always been part of the movement.
See, the other thing is who owns the data? And when community university partnerships were done the wrong way, the university partnered with the community, and it wasn't really a partner, it was more of a silent partner. We grab the data, and then we write the article, we write the report, and then the community is left basically with nothing. The model of community university model, or communiversity model that we developed, is that the community is an equal partner. If a grant's being written, the community is written into the grant. And if we talk about air monitoring, community air monitoring, or community epidemiology, or community GIS, these models that are now pretty pervasive, and there's monies for that, they just didn't drop out the sky. They were ground truth by communities and universities that communities trusted. And there are some communities that do not trust, and for good reason, some universities. Our university is not created equal. There are some that are very exploitive and mining, grabbing information, and so it means that there's a right way of doing what the community science and the other kinds of projects and initiatives that we fought hard in the previous administration to get monies earmarked for that kind of work. After 40 years, you have environmental justice executive order that Clinton signed. There was not a dime for that. But 29 years later, there was $60 billion for it. Now it's trying to be clawed back. And we're fighting. We're not going to roll over and say, well, take the money, bye-bye. We got some kick-ass lawyers fighting on the behalf of communities for the resources, for tax dollars. Ain't no free money, that's tax dollars. Tax dollars.
We are up against time, and we do have one more question, and I want to do this in we're going to be a lightning round. So we get the question, and we're going to roll up out of here.
Okay, brevity will now be my strong point. So as an academic in recovery, that was supposed to get last. I want to say something that I think deserves a little bit more amplification. And I think one of the challenges that some of us are confronting is that a lot of young scholars are not activating in praxis. So they're impassioned about the theoretical information, they're taking the classes, but when it comes to activating outside of the institutional spaces, particularly for jobs and or positions that are not necessarily as lucrative, we lose that activism piece. And so I want to ask you, how can we encourage, not that you may have the answers, but I want to glean from you, how can we encourage scholars to stay the course? Because I'm scared that because there's not constant gratification or instant gratification, around the reward, that there's a fatigue happens quicker for some of our younger scholars around the passion and the promise of activation.
I'm going to give the last word to Jackie because I know you've been training young folks.
Okay, yeah, that is. Yeah.
I'll answer that too.
Yeah, well, okay, definitely. So what I found to be the most energizing for the young folks that we work with in university and so forth is getting them into community. Like, they get fired up when they're in community, when they feel like, when they can see, feel, touch what they're doing and see the impact of it, and to feel just grounded in what's happening in community, and grounded in being in service of community, and being able to utilize what they're learning in a way that actually drives progress for and with community. So that's what I'm finding, and again, that's what our experience has been, but that might be overly simplistic. I'm sure Bob has more.
Okay, let me give an academic to a recovering academic. I'm not recovering from anything. I love to be an academic. I train young people, educate young people to be excellent in their pedagogy and to understand that they come from communities. So when they work in community, there's this whole idea of Sankofa. You know, go back and get it. You already know where you're going, you gotta know where you're coming from. And I have students who have students who have students. I'm talking 4 generations that I have been able to instill to give back. And I can say, like, I don't know if you remember the Godfather movie. I don't know. I think it was #1. When one of the Godfather's patrons came to him and said, "Godfather, I need you to help me do something in enough favor." And the Godfather said, "I'll give you this favor. I'm gonna do this favor for you, but at some point in time, I might call upon you to do X. Might be to kill somebody, but in other words, I'm going to do this, but you're going to owe me, and I'm going to call upon you." That's the way I see it in terms of when you dispense this training and knowledge, and you try to say give back. When I say I have students, at some points in time, I do call them to assist and support. They're out there doing all kinds of great work across the disciplines. You name it, they're doing it. So the idea is that that's our army of folks who have been trained, and this idea of giving back has been instilled in them. They're not doing this work every day, but it has never left them. Right now, I'm proud to say that we have our 3rd cohort year of environmental justice climate core scholars, undergraduates. There's 25 of them from 15 HBCUs that are at Texas Southern right now doing a 6 weeks summer intensive training core. Now, these are young people. This is our 3rd year. We got a call 3 years ago from a engineering firm. They say, "We're going to give you $2 million to start a mentoring, blah, blah, blah," whatever. Another a foundation called us on a Zoom call. I'm saying, we didn't ask, but we said yes. We'll take this $4 million. The idea is that you have to have something to instill so that something stays with them, so they don't get burned out, don't get discouraged. And if they want to stay in the academy, 30 years ago, there were people asking, "Well, can you get tenure in that? Can you get promotion in that? Can you?" And people say, "Well, I don't want to do that." You have to convince them. You can. Can you win a National Academy? Can you win a Time Award? Can you be? Yes, I'm living proof. So, can you write a book and get it published? Can you? But the reward is not an award. And when you make it that way, you can get people who are interested, motivated, and want to do selfies with you, and young people I'm talking about. And then 5 years later,
We're having a selfie line after this.
5 years later, then you say, "Oh, you gave him a Professor Michael." 5 years later, you say, "Dr. Bull, you know I'm a environmental engineer. You know I'm a lawyer. No, you were asleep in my class." So the idea is that you have to instill in them that. You have to be a teacher, preacher. You have to be all of that to motivate, because you're dealing with different generations. And if you can do that, they won't get burnt out. And you can call on them, and when you call, they'll come.
So what you were saying is that you are the godfather of environmental justice. Yeah. Well, thank you, Kendra, Jackie, Dr. Bullard, for joining us tonight. Thank you all for coming out. And please join us for refreshments after, and also come by for the other 2 installments in this series, June 16th and June 24th. Thank you.